Welcome to our paper presentation on collaborative support networking as a systemic design practice for approaching the polycrisis. And we're exemplifying these with a range of cases from a group of authors: George Fedha, Laurence Habib, myself, Dewi Hartkamp, Flavio Mesquita da Silva, Fred Steier, Abbie VanMeter, and my co-presenter, Sergej van Middendorp. Can you do the next slide?
Yeah, thank you, Dewi, for that introduction. And before we share what we are working on, let us give a brief overview of where we are coming from and where we are today, and what we are wondering about as we share our work. So in earlier work, we looked at the idea of collaborative support networks as structures that help us collaborate across space and time. And we used Bateson's idea of double description to see networks in depth, if you will, in 3D, in 3 dimensions, rather than as flat representations of networks. And we also wondered what leadership in such networks looks like, and specifically leadership in such network, not so much leadership of the network. And talked, for example, about vulnerability and learning as characteristics that happen when you look at leadership in the network. And we also try to conceive of them through the lens of value networks as living systems, thereby trying to integrate both a ratio-technical perspective, a socio-technical perspective, but also an emotional embodied perspective, trying to transcend and integrate those concepts. However, while wondering how to proceed with that work, we came to the idea to shift our perspective from the noun of the network to the practice of networking. And this is in part driven by our desire to understand how we can learn and interrelate across our cases, because we are each bringing in very different cases where we want to understand how collaborative supporting in and across those cases work together. So in the context of this conference, Rivers of Conversation, we come up with a new metaphor that we'll say a bit more about later. And that metaphor, the meeting of the rivers, sort of reinstates our earlier work. It gives us, again, a 3-dimensional perspective on collaborative support networks. But now we also bring in a different mode, an additional mode of sensing, which is listening. And in analogy with double description, we now look for double listening. So how can we reflect in action and shift from the collaborative support network to collaborative support networking as a 4-dimensional practice, if you will? And even wondering further, how can we, while doing that, create this connection to the whole? And playing with metaphors, we could say, how do we shift from the flow to the groove, which brings in the idea of jazz improvisation, for example, as a metaphor to understand that concept. Now, in order to sort of make that practical, we will try to engage in an experiment, Dewi and I, as representatives of our group, where we will use the metaphor, my case is your case, and your case is my case, to see if we can make an experience like that happen, and then reflect on what that may mean for collaborative support networking. So having said all that, the meeting of the waters.
Thank you very much. Yeah, the general metaphor of meeting of the waters gives us a framework to explore this networking. What we see here are 2 rivers that form the Amazon. So the Rio Negro and the Rio Solimões. And the Rio Negro and the Rio Solimões are quite different. And at the same time, they have similarities. So at one hand, we have a dark, rich in nutrients river. And on the other hand, we have the much more light river of Solimões. And they confluence, but do not mingle immediately. And this is emphasizing the differences, so the coexistence of diversity and several other characteristics that we see also when we are networking, in our case, explaining 2 cases. So this emphasizes the universal needs of the networking, but also has the power of letting each river's story and voice and direction be there. Unfortunately, we bid you to witness at this moment what the situation is there. So not only have the rivers dried there, but also they are threatening the livelihoods of the people and the whole ecosystem. This, of course, is not only in this Amazon region, but also all over the world. So we recently had several flooding in Europe, and also one of our presenters was threatened by, obviously, the hurricane. And the particular being that even though north of Florida was considered safe, a lot of our infrastructure, like hospitals, are situated next to the coast. So we're actually not yet designed to be responsive of this threat. And yeah, that has a large impact on the communities there. So now I will be introducing our design experiment to emphasize the sound and movement of our rivers of conversation. And I hope you have time to let it sink in, come to yourself.
All right, so the sound of this cascade could be conceived as a metaphor for the polycrisis. And that concept, of course, has been defined originally in 1999, as we see with the quote from Morin and Kern here. And more recently has been developed, as Laurence et al. Say underneath. And we see the re-emergence of that term in much of the literature. However, there's some risk in this polycrisis also being like a flat term. So let's pay also notice to what climate scientists have said in their latest report. For the first time, I think so explicitly that climate change could contribute to a collapse. And then they mean a systemic collapse of systems in society. So I've heard activists say this, but I've never seen scientists say this so explicitly. And Ripple et al. Sort of built on the work of 15,000 climate scientists. So now, for the first time, maybe we face such a catastrophe at this scale. So now let's switch to a different river and see what the experience does with his now.
Thank you, Sergej. So this river sound and movement has much more space for the river's story. And in understanding the network needs, it's time to reflect and see how can we be responsive beyond the rationale and keep the deep meaning making we're looking for to connect and relate and combine, while at the same time creating room for both stories And we are experimenting with the design methods to include sound and movement, as we don't want networks to stop abruptly. We want to give feedback and grow on that. And when we're thinking about networking, obviously we are looking for fair and just processes, and also the outcomes to reflect this regenerative justice practice. And as we are doing this, we are learning as a network, learning as doing this as a practice. Our rivers go out to sea, and we now turn to our third sound as being a different kind of movement.
So, some of the ideas we want to bring into this shift from network to networking are double listening. So how can we listen on multiple levels, or maybe even in multiple dimensions, while we are engaging in conversation about relating across cases? How do those rhythms, like we just experienced in the rivers or in the waves breaking on the beach, come into conversation? How can we be aware of that while talking about a specific subject together? How can we be aware for the continuity and the continuing of stories that are already there in the cases as they come together, and how they may continue while flowing further towards the sea? And how can we transcend even the movement and bring in this dimension where we become related with the whole, or as jazz musicians might say, the groove? How do we make that work? And what does it teach us about relating across our cases? So that brings us, I think, to our experiment, Dewi. But before we do that, relating the two cases that we bring into our collaborative support network, let's very briefly also share the cases of our co-authors. Dewi, you want to introduce them? Or should I do that?
Yeah.
I should do that, yes. All right, so the first case, this is Abbie VanMeter's case, is about Omega Women's Leadership Network in the United States. And you see a picture here of a cohort of that network being together at a retreat center. The second case is Flavio Mesquita da Silva's case, where he worked with the school systems in Ceará in Brazil, in the context of the generation of peace, hosting world cafes, talking about what does peace mean for you, how do we make peace, what is the face of peace. The third case is George Fedha's work with the World Food Programme, trying to understand how we move beyond food security as a metaphor to regenerative food systems, continuing over a longer period of time, and empowering the people in the system themselves to become more self-supporting. In the fourth case, which is Laurence Habib's case, we wonder how the emergence of artificial intelligence, not only as a way of replacing human activity, but as a way of possibility for collaboration, and how do the human and artificial intelligence work together in the context of learning at university, is explored. And we will talk more about our two cases of peaceful civil resistance and the regeneration of food systems as we engage in the experiment. So having said that, let's begin.
Sergej, can you tell me what are you engaged in, and what does it mean for you to be in the peaceful civil resistance?
Yes, so I'm engaged in demonstrating in ways that are disruptive of our current systems. So in this case, you see me with my fellow demonstrators blocking a road in Brussels to demand an end to fossil fuel subsidies. And what brings me there is, one way of saying what brings me there is what we have here on our banner. So I'm a scholar, I have a lot of time, and I spend a lot of time understanding systems. And at some point, I know enough in the face of the crisis to feel a responsibility to act and go beyond what I consider normal and venture into situations that may be more risky, but also bringing to bear my desire to change and to help us try as hard as we can to change the current way we are on.
Yeah, thank you. So it resonates. I feel it resonates now with my case, where I'm coming from the greenhouse horticulture sector, but to really create and connect for regenerative food systems in the Netherlands. It's all very well to have innovative practices, but the way land allocation is organized, there is really a barrier, and I feel that we need to speed up. Time is running out, and this leads to sharing of experiences with other regenerative food production systems in Europe, tackling with the same issues of how can we get past the current interests and above the silos that are very sectoral determined, and feeling our way into creating responsibility to take action, and this action being further than your first assigned responsibility.
So how do you relate personally between this need that I can really feel is urgent and important on a system scale and between countries and your personal engagement? How do you make that connection?
Well, I really find networking helpful, as I can reflect doubts and also other people that are taking action, to see if we can make the movement bigger and what is needed to make more impact on policy and allocation measures. And at the same time, struggling with the time frame. So 2030 is not so far away, and currently we're running out of time. So with local communities, or at least with differentiated local communities, I see we're trying to connect to really make a movement going.
How would you see that movement relate to civil disobedience, disruptive action, like we are doing here as scientists, some of whom are food scientists?
Yeah, the question is not so much if we can take disruptive action, but how to scale it up to make impact. And there are different ways of trying to make this impact. And I think that reflecting with your case, we can see that there's some kind of organizing structure needed that is different from what we now have.
Yeah, what strikes me is that in the image that you brought in to share your case, we have a meeting in the top left, right? And
Yeah.
without being specific about what that meeting is about, I wonder You could see us also in some kind of meeting there on the road, right? So what is the connection between meeting with people in time and space and indeed the scaling up that we need and the pressure of time?
Yeah. So the meeting is a way of reflecting and connecting to go forward. And although I don't have the solution at hand, I think that once it meets like this, you can grow these connections and make sure that they are fostered and within Europe. And there are several ways of taking this action and in creating more movement. So yeah, I feel this responsibility in the same way you are doing. This responsibility to not only meet, but also look into how to create the movement.
Is there anything in our conversation now as it unfolds, reflecting also on what we intended to do, that you think offers a possibility for that?
I think that several structures will be questioned at this time. And it helps to feel that this is not only happening in the case of regenerative food systems, but across themes such as healthcare systems or climate justice, questioning of AI. And so it's in different themes.
Yeah, that's also what I feel emerging, the exploration of the similarities and differences between two people as we are doing now, the meetings we are part of, as we are witnessing in our pictures here, and the systems in which these meetings occur. There seems to be like a continuity also in our conversation of shifting between those levels and trying to make connections.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Sergej.
Yeah, thank you, Dewi, for this experiment. All right.
So we invite you also to reflect with us and participate in how to create networking with responsive systems design. And please share with us or network with us or get into contact via the email address below. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.